In this video, we are covering 3 breaking developments from March 17, 2026, that are reshaping the war between the United States, Israel, and Iran. First, we will talk about the targeted killing of Ali Larijani, Iran's top security chief, in an Israeli airstrike. Second, we will look at the resignation of the U.S. counterterrorism director and what President Trump said about it. And third, we will examine Trump's contradictory statements about the Strait of Hormuz and the international coalition he claims is forming. These 3 stories, taken together, paint a picture of a conflict moving fast, with no off-ramp in sight. Ali Larijani is dead. On March 17, 2026, Iranian state media confirmed that Israel killed one of the most powerful men inside the Islamic Republic in a direct airstrike. Larijani, 67 years old, was not just a bureaucrat. He was the architect of Iran's security apparatus, a man who had spent decades shaping the country's defense policy, nuclear negotiating strategy, and intelligence alliances. His death is not a footnote in this war. It is one of the most significant targeted killings since the conflict began, and here is what makes this even more significant. Larijani did not die alone. His son, Morteza Larijani, was also killed in the same strike. So was Alireza Bayat, the Deputy Secretary for Security Affairs at Iran's Supreme National Security Council. In one operation, Israel did not just eliminate a single target. It decapitated a critical node of Iran's national security decision-making structure. This is the kind of strike that takes years of intelligence to execute. And the fact that Israel pulled it off in the middle of an active war tells you something important about the depth of Israeli penetration into Iranian systems. To understand why Larijani's death matters so much, you have to understand who he was. He served as Speaker of Iran's parliament. He served as Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council. He was a close personal confidant of Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader who was himself killed by an Israeli airstrike on February 28, just 17 days before Larijani's death. Think about that sequence for a moment. In less than 3 weeks, Israel has killed the supreme leader of Iran, and now the man who functioned as one of the country's top security architects. The chain of command inside the Islamic Republic is not just under pressure, it is being systematically dismantled. Larijani had also been deeply involved in managing the brutal crackdown on domestic protests that erupted in Iran in late 2025 and early 2026. Human rights organizations reported that Iranian authorities killed thousands of civilians during that period of unrest. Larijani was considered one of the principal designers of that repression. He was also Iran's lead negotiator in nuclear talks with Washington. And as recently as the opening days of this war, he publicly stated that Tehran had no interest in negotiating with the United States to end the conflict. That position, combined with everything else he represented, made him a high-priority target. Beyond his domestic role, Larijani served as a crucial diplomatic bridge between Iran and its allies. He traveled to Moscow on January 30th to meet personally with Vladimir Putin, just weeks before the war began. The Kremlin described those discussions as focused on regional and international issues, as well as bilateral cooperation. Since the conflict started, Russia has reportedly been providing intelligence to Iran, intelligence that has been used to target American forces in the region. Larijani was one of the key figures managing that relationship. His elimination severs one of the most sensitive threads connecting Tehran and Moscow at a moment when Iran needs every advantage it can find. Now, let us talk about what is happening inside Washington, because the cracks are not only visible in Tehran. On the same day that news of Larijani's death was breaking, President Donald Trump addressed the resignation of Joe Kent, director of the National Counterterrorism Center. Kent stepped down because he reportedly did not share the administration's assessment that Iran represented a sufficient threat to justify the military campaign being waged against it. Trump's response was blunt. He said it was a good thing that Kent left because he could not work with someone who did not believe Iran was a threat. He also said, and this is worth pausing on, that his decision to bomb Iran prevented what he called a nuclear holocaust. That statement carries enormous weight. If Trump is publicly framing this war as a preemptive strike against a nuclear threat, he is essentially confirming that the destruction of Iran's nuclear infrastructure was not just a side objective. It was the central justification. The resignation of the counterterrorism director over a fundamental disagreement about threat assessment is not a minor administrative shuffle. It reflects a deeper tension within the U.S. national security apparatus about how this war was justified, how it is being conducted, and where it is going. When senior intelligence and security officials start walking out the door mid-conflict over strategic disagreements, that is a signal that deserves serious attention. And then there is the Strait of Hormuz. This is where things get complicated in a very public way. Over the weekend, Trump called on countries with interests in the strait to join a naval coalition to keep the waterway open. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most strategically critical choke points on Earth. Between 20 and 30% of the world's oil passes through that narrow passage between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula. If Iran closes it, or even threatens to disrupt traffic through it, the global economy feels it almost immediately in the form of energy price shocks. Trump announced on Monday that several countries had agreed to join the coalition and were on their way, some of them having to cross an ocean to get there. But by Tuesday, sitting in the Oval Office alongside Irish Taoiseach Michael Martin, Trump shifted his tone entirely. He told reporters that the United States does not need help, that it does not need any help when it comes to the strait. He then criticized the United Kingdom, France, and NATO for refusing to join the coalition, despite what he described as years of American support and the presence of thousands of U.S. troops across their territories and in their defense arrangements. The contradiction here is impossible to ignore. You cannot simultaneously call for an international coalition and then declare you do not need one, all within 48 hours. Either the coalition is necessary to sustain operations in and around the Strait of Hormuz, or it is not. The fact that major allies including the UK, France, and the broader NATO alliance have declined to participate is a significant diplomatic setback, regardless of how Trump frames it publicly. These are not adversaries. These are treaty allies, countries bound to the United States through decades of mutual defense commitments. Their refusal to join a coalition in support of this war is a statement in itself. Trump did cite several Gulf states as supportive, including Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and Bahrain. He praised Israel as a strong partner. But there is an important distinction between Gulf states engaging in quiet diplomacy aimed at keeping the strait open, which serves their own economic interests, and those same states publicly committing military assets to an American-led coalition against Iran. No Gulf country has publicly joined the coalition. The diplomatic support Trump is describing and the formal military commitment he initially called for are two very different things. What these three stories tell us, taken together, is that this war is in a phase of rapid escalation and deep uncertainty. Israel is executing a systematic campaign to destroy Iran's command structure, and it is doing so with remarkable precision and intelligence. The United States is fighting a war whose internal justifications are already producing high-level resignations. And the international architecture that Washington expected to mobilize around this conflict is not materializing in the way the administration projected. Trump's insistence that the U.S. does not need help may be true in a strictly military sense. American naval and air power in the region is overwhelming. But wars are not won by military power alone, and the political sustainability of a prolonged conflict in one of the world's most sensitive strategic corridors depends on far more than carrier groups and airstrikes. The next days and weeks will determine whether the pressure being applied to Iran's leadership structure produces a collapse, a negotiated off-ramp, or a deeper entrenchment and escalation from Tehran. What we know right now, on March 17, 2026, is that the men who built and ran Iran's war machine are dying, and the world is watching to see who, if anyone, is willing to step in and stop it.